Thank you everybody for coming to my talk. Today I hope you can get some helpful information if you're switching careers, you have a friend or family member switching careers, but also if you're a curriculum designer, you work in professional training and maybe you work with people who don't necessarily have a technical background. And just some of my philosophy, I think, on what I think we need as a community to sort of standardize our methods and set realistic expectations for people who are interested in programming as part of their career path. So who am I and what do I do? You're probably wondering, why should we care what this random girl thinks? So my background is in physics. So technically, I would say I am a career switcher. I did learn to code as part of my education, but since then I've basically become a data scientist. I work a lot with Irish language research, actually, so I have a huge interest in computational linguistics, natural language processing, that sort of thing, but I do all sorts. I like to joke that a lot of physicists get tired of numbery data, so we switch over to wordy data. I don't know. I am a Python Ireland committee member, and I really want to emphasize from this talk, if you take away anything, getting involved in the community and making sure your students get involved in the community and are immersed in the sort of culture, if you will, is one of the best things that you can do on this path. So if you're interested in volunteering like that, come talk to me, or really anyone who's running around with like the yellow shirts or anything like that. It's great to get involved. I write curricula, so I spend a lot of time thinking about how to best convey information at a level that's really reasonable. And I did start off with children and quickly realized that a lot of those techniques were really helpful for especially people from a non-technical background. And I try to make a lot of my materials freely available. So if you're interested in anything, I have a lot of free stuff coming up as well. If you think it might be helpful for you or somebody around you, you can find me on LinkedIn right there. I review curricula, so if you write materials, feel free to reach out. I do teach one-on-one, and I also teach groups as well. So the main thing today is, how do we support adults learning to code? And I think that the biggest thing to focus on is setting realistic expectations, because I do see a lot of unbelievably unrealistic things floating around. Um, so what do people come in thinking we do? To the left, you'll see there what my mother wishes I would do. But in general, I think people tend to have maybe a glamorous or just sort of unrealistic expectation of what a job in tech looks like, possibly from the media. Also, things are changing so rapidly right now that we have to really think about how we're advising people starting off today, especially with Gen AI and everything like that. Another thing, I've been seeing several companies that do specialize in teaching programming saying is, advertising boot camps, like 6-week boot camps, being like, yeah, get a job in tech afterwards. This is completely unrealistic unless you're going to work really hard for a while afterwards. And I also review their materials and see they're missing a lot of things that I want to talk about that I think we need to include. And then I see advertisements. Do you want to make a 6-figure salary? I don't make a 6-figure salary. A lot of us don't. And I have 3 degrees. So if you're going in it for the money, right now especially, I'm not sure that's the best motivator. It's not a terrible motivator, but we'll talk about it. We're just going to go right past that. And then what do we actually do? It's true, I really work with my students that they don't freak out when they see an error. They stay calm and they learn how to use their tools. So what I want to emphasize is becoming a programmer isn't about knowing everything. It's not about just a checklist of, I know this, this, and this, and now I can get a job making a bunch of money. It's about developing problem-solving skills and confidence to tackle the hard problems we don't yet know how to solve. And I think that that's a personality trait that you need to foster and you can learn, but it really helps if you are the kind of person where you like to tinker with things, you like to play around with things, you're curious, and you're a passionate problem solver. And that's really what we need to emphasize. But this is where most students, they hit a wall and realize this isn't really for them. And one of the more recent things I've been realizing is with things like ChatGPT, Copilot, things like this, it takes them longer to hit that wall for them to finally realize, you know what? This isn't really for me. I don't like sitting with these really difficult problems. So we have been here before. I give a lot of talks on pedagogy. I did a talk called Child Prodigies and Six-Figure Salaries. It had an embarrassing amount of pie charts for a data scientist. Friends don't let friends make pie charts. Uh, I am going to be giving a sort of uh, intensive on data visualization, and that's one of the things we'll be talking about. But the basic summary there is we need to rethink about how we're advertising to newcomers to the fields, and have a general community set standard. I think especially as a Python community for programming education. How long is it going to take? What materials should they be using? And what should they be putting their efforts into? If you're coming out and realizing, oh, what is big O notation? You might really struggle in your technical interviews, So that can really cause some issues if you've sunk a lot of time into it, only to realize you haven't learned a lot of things that are actually really important. But the main thing is teaching programming feels pedagogically bizarre. I do teach other subjects, like I help people get into business school and things like that. I'm also an avid language learner, and for some reason, I've noticed people can stick with that and be a lot more successful with that sometimes. And I think a lot of it does come down to how these different topics are taught and how we're supporting people. And there is this huge social component to a lot of these other topics, as well as if I'm helping you get into, say, a business school or something like that, you have a specific timeline and a specific test with specific standards that you're trying to meet. It's a lot more abstract to say, I want to learn to program. So we have to figure out how to actually come up with what are we trying to do here and set a realistic goal there. So thus the Unbootcamp method was born. I met with a lot of students who didn't seem to retain information from boot camps, and I wanted to learn how to best support them and target exactly what needed to happen to help them make this transition. So I took a four-pronged approach that I thought would be ideal to incorporate into any training program and to see if they could stick with it and things like this and what helped along the way. So I wanted to solidify the fundamentals. I wanted to provide guidance for portfolio projects that would be meaningful for them and that companies might be impressed by. And I wanted to emphasize technical interviews as well. I feel like this is really lacking, seriously lacking from a lot of materials, and it can almost shock people when they see things about, algorithms and all this stuff. They're like, oh, I have to know that, and they've never seen it before after sinking thousands of dollars into boot camps. And then I also did give them a massive incentive to sign up for one-on-one mentoring to see if that individual attention would be helpful to them. So we're going to talk about the successes and the failures because there were a lot of things that just didn't go as expected. So as a quick note, so I'm going to outline some of the serious challenges that I think we need to be aware of. The first one that I just like to point out, and I'll be doing a much more in-depth talk specifically about accommodations for disabilities. This is a huge issue. A lot of big companies, and I don't want to call out anyone, they have no extended test time, accommodations, nothing for the visually impaired. And as a community, we really need to remember that when we're making any sorts of materials, that can be a serious barrier. But sometimes people can't afford any computer or things like that, so you can help somebody out if you have an extra computer laying around. Actually, I know several of you probably do. You can donate that to somebody who's trying to learn. But I want to focus in this talk on the other points. So first is aptitude and fit, and this can almost be a dirty word. A lot of people say, oh, anybody can learn anything, and I'm not against that. I just think that what we really need to think about is, does it fit with your personality type, and is it something that's really realistic for you? Because we have a huge dropout rate in programming education. A lot of my friends have thrown around statistics like 97, 98%, something like that. So we need to forewarn people so they aren't just chucking their money at us. And of course, if you're in for-profit education, you're probably staring at me going, shh, stop telling them that. But I think it's ethical to do so. So the first thing is to target, well, why do you want to switch? And is it a good reason, right? Money is a big one, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but I am saying it's probably not enough to help you stick with it. But that is the first thing that comes up. Personal challenge and growth. I got 32 responses from a survey I took, by the way, and then also read some materials. And this is basically the ranking that I got here for people's reasons. I think that that's a great one, growth, because you definitely will have a lot of challenge and learn lots of new things. So that's a good motivation. Work-life balance. I don't know where they got this because I work all the time. Anyways, and then it was a lifelong dream. I think that's fantastic as well. And then the person who did respond to me saying it was because of refugee status, she's actually got a job recently. And so I'm very happy for her, but that was quite inspirational. So how do you know if it's for you? I think that you need to think about, what are your values? Do you like a hard challenge? Do you like math? Are you comfortable sitting there reading documentation and trying to figure out things and learn new skills all the time? Um, Consider your aptitude and your personality. I also know that a lot of people do get involved because they like gaming. There is a misconception there that it's somehow similar, but I have to say, when I do get adult people saying, "Oh yeah, I love video games. I need to make more money, and I want to be a game designer." That's like the one thing you can get a computer science degree in and come out making minimum wage. So we do need to think about that. I think the most important thing, though, is to provide pre-tests to students. Do they sit with a problem and try to solve logical puzzles? Is that something that they enjoy? But the other thing is basic computer skills as well. I also get a lot of students who even really struggle to type and even tell me they hate computers. So I'm like, okay. But the real question is, what problem do you want to solve? This is so much more important than, eh, some sort of general goal. So the fact is, the people I see most successful have a clear answer to this question. They have realistic goals, expectations, and timelines for how they're going to achieve what it means to them to learn to code, right? In fact, I think focusing on the end goal too much of, I'm going to get a job, is a bad idea, because the struggle is endless, right? We're all lifetime learners and passionate problem solvers, I tend to think. So if that sounds like you, then it might be a great fit. But I think the absolute best place to start because of this is, think about how I can use these skills now in my current line of work or in one of my hobbies. And that's a great way to learn to code, is by integrating it into your life right now. So, moving on to materials. All right, you've decided it's for you. We've gone through the aptitude and fit and everything. But how do we support somebody on this path, and how do you support yourself? I do see a massive issue with materials when I review them, and some serious misconceptions among well-meaning people who want to help. So I'd like to point those out as well. So why start with Python if you're wanting to learn to code? I do like to mention, the main thing is the friendly and helpful community. It's great. There are a lot of great, beginner-friendly resources. It can be tricky to pick the first one to start with, right? It's free and open source. It's also closer to natural language, so that makes our work easier as developers, and it is in high demand because of the many, many uses. But because of the many, many uses, this makes it great for what I was talking about earlier, integrating it into your current line of work or your current hobby, finding something that you can build, right? That would, apply to something right now. So, selecting quality learning materials can be really tricky. The first thing I want to emphasize is, if you're claiming to teach people Python, you should be teaching them idiomatic Python, right? So if PEP 8 doesn't come up ever, if the Zen of Python doesn't come up ever in your Python curriculum, I do think that that's an issue, right? And I was really annoyed to find out how many people who were learning Python who responded to my survey with this glorious pie chart, how they had never heard of PEP 8 or the Zen of Python. The other thing I like to see in a quality learning material, and the other thing is, sometimes you'll see learners posting materials. By the way, I love to see this if somebody's learning to code and they share what they're doing. but please, encourage people to be open. Hey, I'm learning, so that if they do something that's maybe not Pythonic, like for instance here with pandas using a for loop to fill a new column as opposed to just vectorizing your code. This is great for people to discuss and get feedback, but it can cause confusion for learners thinking you're like an expert, right? So this is one of the issues with like YouTube and certain things that aren't vetted. But the other thing I like to see is in curricula, emphasis on building a portfolio. I'm tired of seeing the same projects over and over again. So, this is why I like to encourage people to think about their interests, their line of work, because it's much more impressive if you make something that's interesting and useful to you, because people get, annoyed. I mean, Titanic data set is great, but do something else. um, Guided practice that breaks down topics over time. This is, really important as far as, we don't just throw everything at somebody as well, but we want to see them retain things. And then quality notes. And I like to see anything that integrates mentorship, so somebody who's further along in their path as well. I think that that is invaluable. And then is the structure something you can stick to? It's kind of like coming up with a gym regimen. If you want to get super fit, you can't say, oh, I'm going to work out 2 hours every single day if that's not a realistic goal for you. So is 10 minutes a day a good idea? Things like that. So it's at this point I like to point out a few things about my teaching philosophy and how I would suggest to approach things. So some things you might be missing is that a lot of adult materials are far too much up front, and sometimes if it's been a while since we were a learner, we lose that empathy. So we give them great information, but we forget what it's like to be in the mind of somebody who's never seen this before. They need time, and they are highly unlikely to follow up if you just give them all of the basics of Python in 2 days. It's much better to trickle it over a little bit of time. We can forget that people are humans, and just sending somebody a bunch of links is super overwhelming. So if your solution to something is, well, I send them links, it's much better to sit down with them and walk them through so they don't get freaked out, especially if they're a beginner. We don't talk about study skills enough, and how to integrate things into their life holistically, because sometimes they have children, they have a job already, things like that. So you have to take that into account. And then we assume they all have the same goals. Maybe they don't want to all be devs. Maybe they just want to be tech literate. And that's actually been something that's really interesting. Is sometimes I get students who just want to know what can you do with Python, so that if they come up against a problem, they know to maybe go and grab a Python developer or something like that. And this is good if you're doing training, to sort of group people into cohorts if you do group classes, to make sure that people who have the same general goals are sort of aligned with each other and they can support each other. So I have talked about this quite a lot before, but I like to use a spiral method. I'm running out of time, so I'll just say basically constant revision with a slow increase in how difficult things are. I notice a very linear path in a lot of materials, and I think that this is something that is quite good. It's one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of boot camps as a sole source of programming education, because in 6 weeks, you don't have much time to go back, review things, do knowledge checks, everything like that. A note on Gen AI, because, this is kind of a big thing. I feel very strongly that students need to get the basics down, and that it's sort of from the start, they're sitting there trying to solve hard problems and seeing if this is a process they enjoy. Develop those problem skills, and then be careful with prompting as well, because that can cause some serious issues. So I think warning them as well about the risks of it and everything like that. But then there's also this mixture of they need to get comfortable with the tools available. My suggestion is stay away from it for as long as possible, and then slowly kind of integrate it personally. But I asked ChatGPT what it thought, and it totally backed me up. Which points, I hope you guys understand that's ironic. It's been a bit of an issue in academia where people will say, hey, ChatGPT, give me this thing, and it will sort of spit out what you want to hear. And then it turns out that paper that it cited doesn't even actually say that. So, but yeah, I think it's something to be wary of and see if you just enjoy sitting with the problems. I will say, though, having it help you explain the code step by step, if you're reading code, because that's what a lot of us are doing a lot of time as opposed to writing it, that is a really helpful use for learners. But please don't just solve all the problems with ChatGPT. You're not getting anything out of it. Finally, motivation and sticking with the plan, it can be really tricky because of time, children, current job. You have to make sure you have realistic goals so you get positive reinforcement by small successes over time. That is really important. The other thing is you want community support, but I believe in curriculum development, I found something that's really missing is kind of this mutual accountability and social pressure of having, study buddies or some sort of cohort going along the same path with you. That can be really helpful. So have great study habits, do the work, and get the job. 3 steps, easy peasy, right? Not really. A lot of adult career switchers haven't been students in a while and have maybe forgotten what it takes to learn a complex skill. So the first thing I like to emphasize is something called behavioral activation. This is from cognitive behavioral therapy. What you want to do is get used to something over time, schedule in 1 time a week to do it. The next week, schedule in 2 times. The next week, schedule in 3 times. You're going to find just getting started helps so much. Then you want to think about how are you going to really measure success? What does that really mean to you? So you can measure the hours that you put in, so input, or you can measure certain goals like output. So do you want to earn some sort of certificate? Do you want to finish some sort of course? That would be output. Or, the number of projects you make, a number of lines of code you wrote, and keep track of it so you can see your progress. Schedule things and tick off things one by one. I'm a huge fan of bullet journals to help me out. And I am going to be making a video series on how I use that to manage things. I think it's really great. I've recently gotten into knowledge management systems, which are awesome. Like I use Obsidian, so all these links that can be really overwhelming, that is one way to tackle it so it doesn't freak you out. And then social accountability, I think, is a huge thing. Something I've actually integrated into Python Ireland to help us get stuff done is body doubling. It's when you just say, hey, I have something to do, you have something to do, let's sit there quietly and work next to each other, and it's really effective. This is a concept used from the neurodivergent community, and it is really, really useful. And there's actually websites where you can just get a random person to body double you for free, but I recommend grabbing a friend on Google Meets or, Teams or something like that. Or in person is great. And then one-on-one mentoring. The other thing that I'm working on integrating into my courses right now is some sort of checklist, just so people can see what other people are doing and get a realistic timeline of are they progressing around the same rate. And a little healthy competition can help push people a little bit as well. So did my Unbootcamp structure work? Attendance was really difficult, so I switched to recordings. One of the key takeaways I found is shorter recordings really helpful. So as opposed to doing a 3.5 hour intensive or even a 1 hour, they liked 15-minute segments that they could break down over the week. They needed more help on basics than planned, which did support my theory that after the boot camp and taking some time away, because they all did a boot camp before, they had forgotten absolutely everything. So we barely got to the interesting things, which was really disappointing. And they also had really low effort on personal projects. So in the future, I think that that's something that I'm going to emphasize a lot more. But if you're still stuck on for loops, it's really hard to do anything else. Very interesting. So flexibility is great, and I think that that's something to remember when it comes to adult career switchers. But you have to balance it with accountability, and I'm working on different methods for that. So in the future, short-term videos, I'm going to have suggested office hours instead of live classes. flipping the classroom, have them do some work and then they come in and present it to you and the other students. Body doubling is great, trying to pair people up with study buddies as well. And then guided projects with notes to help get them started, because a lot of them just didn't know where to start with projects. So in the future, I am going to just do recordings and then have these intensive Q&As or something like that. So it all comes down, I think, to collecting data. So pre-tests, which can be great, create clear aims with each student at the start, break down the aims into actionable goals, and even create a little bit of friendly competition between them. But I think the most important thing is to create social accountability and undeniable evidence of advancement from the start. So in summary, community is absolutely indispensable. And thank you everyone for being here. And I just want to encourage anyone who's switching careers to check into your local meetups, your Python meetups, PyLadies, Django Girls, anything like that. And as always, feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Anyways, that's thanks in Irish.
Thank you so much, Mykalin.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Which soft skill do you think will be most useful when you want to change career?
Which what?
Which soft skill do you think it's most useful?
I would say industriousness. So, being the kind of person who just learns how to collect, figure out what your resources are and go from there. A lot of people, if it's not obvious right at the start, they tend to just sort of flop and go, I don't know, can you do it for me? And so being the kind of person who sticks with the problem and really tries to tackle it as best you can. But the other thing is, being comfortable asking questions and relying on people. I think culture can kind of get in the way as far as feeling like you have to have the answers all the time as well. So learning to balance that and not being afraid to seem the fool.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
If you have other questions, you can find Mykalin in the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.